"Sir, could you buy this gift box?" The delivery girl's hands were shaking so badly that the ribbon on the lid shook with them. She was 27 years old, soaked through from the walk, and she still had the thermal bag strapped across her chest because she hadn't even finished her second shift of the day yet. She'd spent 15 minutes standing out on that sidewalk in Boston's North End, arguing with herself, before she found the nerve to walk through the door. The man she was about to ask was Roderick Vance. In this city, people didn't look him in the eye for more than 3 seconds. He ran the docks in Charlestown and half the freight that moved through Massachusetts, and he carried a family name that made grown men lower their voices when they said it out loud. He was 38 years old, and every Thursday night for 3 years, he'd eaten dinner alone at the same restaurant, at the same table, a table set for 2, the second chair always pulled out, and not one living soul permitted to sit in it. His men moved to stop her. He lifted 2 fingers, and they stepped back. So she told him what she needed, and what it would cost her if he said no. And then she braced herself for the same answer she'd already gotten from everyone else that day. He looked at her for a long moment. He didn't ask what was inside. He didn't ask who she was. He said 4 words. "How much for it?" She named her price. He counted the bills out onto the tablecloth, and then he said something she'd carry with her for the rest of her life, that she was selling it far too cheap. And when he opened that box right there at the table, a man who hadn't shed a tear in 3 years, not at the funeral, not at the graveside, not once in front of another human being, sat in that empty dining room and wept. She had no idea what she'd just handed him. Neither did he. Not yet. If this story moves you the way it moved me, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you'd like to sit with me for the next one. And if someone you know needs a reminder that a person's worth has nothing to do with what they can pay, send this their way. Now, let's get back to that dining room in Boston, and to the night everything changed. The melody kept spilling into the empty dining room, thin and clear, a string of notes rising and then falling again, repeating over and over as though it had waited 3 years to be heard, and now no longer knew where to stop. No one in the room moved. The server stood frozen beside the wine counter, both hands still gripping the cloth he had been using to polish the glasses. Outside the door, the driver named Colm tilted his head slightly, one hand resting loosely on the handle, and even he didn't step inside. Roderick didn't wipe his face. He simply stayed that way, his eyes never leaving the small wooden box resting in the middle of the white tablecloth, until the music mechanism began to slow and finally fell silent. Then he lifted the box, carefully, the way a person might lift something that could shatter from nothing more than a heavy breath, and turned it upside down. Ella stood 2 steps from the table, her hand still clenched around the strap of the insulated bag, afraid to move. She had imagined every possible scenario during the 15 minutes she had spent standing outside on the sidewalk, but none of them had looked anything like this. Roderick angled the bottom of the box toward the light. There, sunk into the grain of the cedar wood, so faint that it could only be seen when held at exactly the right angle, were several tiny carvings. 2 letters, a short line, then a few numbers. His finger stopped over them. He read them once, then read them again, and his jaw tightened so hard that Ella could hear his teeth grinding together. She couldn't see anything except the bottom of the box. She had held it all evening, had wiped it with the hem of her shirt before wrapping it in paper, and it had never once occurred to her to turn it over. She had never known there was music inside it either. Roderick set the box down again, very gently, then took out his wallet once more. He counted out another stack of bills, much thicker than the first one, and pushed it across the table toward her. The money slid over the tablecloth and stopped directly in front of Ella. She stared at it. She thought about her mother's dialysis treatment the next morning. She thought about the balance in her bank account, about the bill she had folded into quarters and hidden behind the bread box so her mother wouldn't see it, about the 2 buses she would have to take at 5 o'clock in the morning. She thought about all of it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she reached out, took only the amount she needed, and pushed the rest back toward him. "I already told you the price, sir." Roderick didn't pick up the money. "You need it." "Yes," she said it, and her voice trembled, but her hand didn't. "I do, but I'm selling you a box. I'm not selling you the right to pity me." The server beside the wine counter stopped breathing. In Boston, no one spoke to Roderick Vance in that tone, and no one pushed his money back across a table. Roderick raised his eyes to her. He looked at her for a long time, longer than he had the first time, and there was something in his gaze that Ella couldn't understand, something that looked almost like pain and almost like a question. Then he pulled the extra money back, folded it, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. She thought it was over. She bent slightly, murmured her thanks, and turned to leave. Where did you get it? The question followed her across the room. Ella stopped in the middle of the aisle. She turned back and saw that he was still sitting in exactly the same position, one hand resting on the lid of the box as though he were afraid someone might take it away. I didn't steal it, sir. She said it immediately, because that was the first thing she was afraid he might think. I didn't ask that. She swallowed. It belonged to my father. He made it. My father was a carpenter. He had a small workshop in Dorchester. Roderick said nothing. He simply waited, and the weight of his silence was so heavy that Ella found herself continuing, even though she hadn't meant to. He died 3 years ago, sir. The workshop is still there. I still pay the rent, but there's nothing left inside anymore. I sold everything. The machines, the tools, the lumber he had in storage, all of it. That box was the last thing. She heard her voice grow thin on those final 3 words, and she hated it, so she rushed through the rest. I polished it again this afternoon. I meant to keep it, but a customer canceled the order without paying, and I still had to cover the cost, so I brought it with me. Roderick's hand remained on the lid of the box. What was your father's name? Ella frowned slightly. It was a strange question, and she was tired enough to recognize just how strange it was. But the man sitting in front of her had just paid her $340 to save her mother's dialysis treatment the next morning. So she answered, Thomas, sir. Thomas Whitmore. Something passed across his face. It happened so quickly that it was almost impossible to catch. But Ella saw it because she was looking straight at him. It wasn't surprise. It was the look of a man who had just heard the exact name he had been trying to remember for a very long time and had never been able to bring back. Roderick didn't ask another question. He turned his head toward the door and gave the slightest lift of his chin. Colum stepped inside without making a sound. Take her home, Roderick said, all the way to her door. Ella meant to refuse. She opened her mouth, then looked through the glass and saw that the rain had grown heavier, saw the bus stop 4 blocks away, saw the clock on the wall showing 10 minutes to 10. She closed her mouth again. When she reached the door, she looked back one last time. The man was still sitting there alone at the table that had been set for 2, with the chair across from him still empty. He wasn't eating anymore. He simply sat there, both hands resting on either side of the wooden box, his head slightly bowed, like a man standing guard over something that had finally been returned to him after a very long time. The car stopped at the entrance to a narrow street in Dorchester, and Ella had to tell Colm twice before he finally agreed to let her out there, instead of pulling up directly in front of her building. She didn't want the neighbors seeing a car like that parked outside the old 3-floor building where she lived. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, hearing the wooden steps creak beneath her feet the way they did every night, and before she put her key into the lock, she paused for a moment to arrange her face into the expression of someone who had simply come home from an ordinary shift. The kitchen light was still on. Nora sat at the dining table, a half-finished glass of water in front of her, the amount measured carefully against the markings on the glass. Mom, you're still awake? I was waiting for you. Ella took off the insulated bag, set it on a chair, then pulled the stack of money from her coat pocket and placed it on the table. I got the money. There's enough for tomorrow morning, and enough left over for Friday, too. Nora looked at the money. She didn't reach for it. Where did it come from? A customer gave me a big tip. Ella opened the refrigerator and pretended to look for something so she wouldn't have to look at her mother. Some man in Back Bay. The order was only $30-something, but he handed me $100. I told him I couldn't take it, but he kept pushing it into my hand. $100. I worked 2 shifts today, Mom. Ella. She closed the refrigerator. Her mother was still sitting straight-backed at the table, both hands resting in front of her, and her eyes held the look of a woman who had raised her daughter for 27 years. Sit down. Ella sat. The center called me this morning, Nora said. They reminded me about this month's copay. I told them to call again next week. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you would do exactly what you just did. Ella said nothing. I understand how that program works, sweetheart. Medicare pays 80%. The remaining 20% is ours. 3 treatments a week, 12 treatments a month, plus the medication, plus transportation, there and back. I've done the math. I'm not illiterate. She spoke in a perfectly calm voice, as if she were reading the weather forecast. And I know how much you make at the gift shop, because you taped your pay stub to the cabinet door back in April and forgot to take it down. I took it down. I read it before you did. Ella lowered her eyes to her hands. There was still a little polishing wax beneath her fingernails, the same wax she had used that afternoon, and she slipped her hands beneath the table to hide them. You work at the shop during the day, and you deliver food at night. I have eyes. I can see. Nora continued. I'm not asking how many hours you work. I'm asking you one thing. Ella looked up. Did you sell your father's box? The kitchen became so quiet that they could hear water dripping into the sink. Ella opened her mouth. She meant to say no. She had prepared that answer on the way home. But when she looked directly into her mother's eyes, the lie dissolved in her throat. "How did you know? You pulled the box out from under your bed this morning." "You thought I was asleep," Nora said. "I heard you open the lid. Then this afternoon, you left for work an hour early, and you've never gone in early before." Ella nodded. She didn't cry. She only felt her throat grow hot, and she hated the feeling. "I'm sorry." "Don't. I know it was the last thing." "I know it was the last thing," Nora said. "And I also know who taught you that things are only things. Your father, that's who." She reached across the table and laid her hand over her daughter's, and her hand was cold. The same cold Ella had grown accustomed to over more than a year. "Your father didn't make that box so it could sit beneath a bed for 3 years. He made things for people to use. What was it he always used to tell you? Every piece of wood needs a job to do," Ella said softly. "That's right." Nora straightened in her chair again. "Well, now it has a job. It saved the 2 of us for a week." "It saved us for more than a week," Ella said, and regretted the words the moment they left her mouth. Nora looked at her. "How much did they pay you?" "Exactly what I owed the shop." "Exactly what you owed." She repeated the words slowly. "What kind of person knows exactly how much you owe?" "I told him the price, Mom. He just paid the price I gave him." Ella stood, gathered the money, and walked toward the tin box on top of the refrigerator where the 2 of them always kept money for medical bills. "He offered me more, but I didn't take it." Nora didn't ask why. She simply watched her daughter's back for a long moment. "My girl," she said, "you're so much like your father." Ella stood with her back still turned, one hand resting on the lid of the tin box, and stayed that way for several more seconds before turning around. "Go to bed, Mom. I'll wake you at 4:30. That night, lying on the sofa in the living room, Ella stared up at the ceiling and thought about the bottom of the box, about the way that man had tilted it toward the light, about the 2 letters she had never noticed on the object she had held onto for 3 years, and about the way his face had changed when she spoke her father's name. The housekeeper opened the door before Roderick could touch the handle, and he didn't ask why his employer had come home an hour earlier than usual, nor did he look down at what Roderick was carrying. In this house on Beacon Hill, no one asked him anything. He went straight upstairs to his study, pushed 2 stacks of files aside, and placed the wooden box in the middle of the desk. Then he sat down across from it. His phone vibrated at 10:30. He knew who it was before he looked at the screen, because only one person called him at that hour, and always expected him to answer. "You're home already?" Silas Brenner's voice was warm and unhurried, the voice of an uncle calling to check in, not a man who had just spent 6 hours down at the docks. "Colm sent me a message. Said something happened at the restaurant tonight." "Nothing happened." "All right, then nothing happened." Silas gave a quiet laugh. "Listen, let me give you an update. Pier 7 is done. 3 containers go out tomorrow morning. Paperwork is clean. The Everett Shipping Company is still making things difficult, but I'll handle it. I've been handling things like that for 30 years. Yeah, there's one more thing." The rhythm of the voice on the other end shifted almost imperceptibly, so slightly that only someone who knew him well would have noticed. "Vincent Ardo. His people in Providence reached into Quincy again this week. You've let this go on too long, Roderick." Roderick didn't answer. His finger was tracing the carved pattern across the lid of the box, a line in the grain that curved around and closed back into itself, done by hand, not by machine. "I'm telling you this because I mean it, so hear me out," Silas continued. "It's been 3 years. 3 years you've been strangling him with money, cutting off his routes, forcing him downward. But when you strangle a man, he can still breathe. You're the head of this name. People are waiting to see whether you're going to finish it, or whether you're going to leave it hanging forever. Your sister has been in the ground for 3 years, and that bastard is still sitting down to good dinners in Federal Hill." A long silence followed. "You're still there, aren't you?" "What did you just say about the wood grain?" Roderick asked. Silence answered him. "What?" "Nothing," Roderick said, and ended the call. He placed the phone face down on the desk, the glass striking the wood with a dry sound. Then he sat perfectly still. And in that silence, he heard his own voice from a moment ago, and realized that he had just said something that made no sense at all, simply to interrupt a name he had spent 3 years hearing without so much as blinking. He stood, opened the low cabinet in the corner of the room, the locked cabinet he hadn't opened once since that autumn. Inside was a flat cardboard box. He carried it to the desk, placed it beside the wooden box, and sat staring at both of them for a long time before lifting the lid. Inside was everything people had sent him after the night of September 14th, and he had never finished reading any of it. A copy of the Boston Fire Department report, a list of everyone present at the scene, a typed list of victims arranged alphabetically, 2 newspapers folded into quarters, a sealed envelope from the investigators that he had held for 40 minutes in the hospital that night before putting it away, unopened, and never touching it again. He didn't open it tonight. Instead, he pulled out the victim list, placed it beneath the desk lamp, and began reading from the top, one line at a time, as though he were seeing it for the first time. He read very slowly. Under the letter W, near the bottom of the page, there was a name. Roderick read it, then lowered the sheet and leaned back in his chair. He didn't say anything. He remained that way until the desk lamp began to warm the skin beside his hand. Then he reached for the wooden box, turned it over once more, and angled the bottom toward the light so he could look again at the faint markings carved into the wood. At 11 o'clock that night, he pressed the intercom. Colm appeared within a minute and stopped at the doorway, without coming fully inside, his arms resting loosely at his sides. "You took her all the way home?" "Yes. Dorchester, Elm Hill Street, a 3-floor building. She made me stop a block away." Roderick gave the smallest nod. "Did she say anything in the car?" "Not a word." Roderick pushed the victim list across the desk, turned it so Colm could read it, and didn't point to any particular line. "Find me everything there is on a man named Whitmore." Colm looked down at the paper. He had driven for Roderick for 11 years, had taken him home on the night of September 14th, had stood outside the hospital corridor that same night, and he understood exactly what the page in front of him was. He didn't ask a single question. "How far do you want me to go?" "All the way," Roderick said. "What he did for a living, where he lived, how he died, who he left behind. I want the file on this desk before sunrise Saturday." "Yes." Colm had turned half a step toward the door when Roderick spoke again, his voice no louder than before. "Colm." "Yes. This doesn't go through Silas." The driver stopped for exactly 1 beat. Then he nodded and closed the door behind him. That night, he was 35 years old. The restaurant in the North End was closed to outsiders. The long table upstairs had been set, and members of the family began arriving at 7 o'clock. Marguerite had texted him a little before 6 that evening. He still had that message on his phone even now. He arrived half an hour early, just as his sister had asked. She was already sitting at the table farthest inside, the one against the wall, still wearing her coat, with a glass of water she hadn't touched in front of her, and a paper bag resting on the chair beside her. 24 years old. She worked in financial control for Vance Freight, the legitimate transportation company that carried the family name, and she was better at the job than anyone he had ever hired. "Sit down," she said. "I'm not joking." "I didn't say you were. You're smiling." He sat down. She pushed the glass of water aside, then pulled it back again, and he noticed that his sister's hands wouldn't stay still. Marguerite Vance had never allowed her hands to betray her in front of him. "I've been going back through the port route books from the last 2 years, she said. "Let me finish before you react, all right?" "All right. There's someone inside our own house." At the other end of the room, 2 people came in at the same time, loud and cheerful, calling his name and wishing him a happy birthday from the doorway. Marguerite stopped speaking. She glanced toward them, then back at him, and nudged the paper bag closer to the leg of the table. "Not here," she said quietly. "Wait until everyone leaves. I have something to give you." "What could be that serious?" "It is serious," she said. "Just let me tell you later. I don't want to say it in a room full of people." Then she smiled, the same kind of smile she always used to end a difficult conversation, and stood to help him greet the guests. Those were the last words his sister ever spoke to him. At 7:20, the room was crowded. Roderick stood at the end of the table with a glass in his hand, listening to some relative tell a story he wouldn't remember a single word of afterward. Marguerite stood about 4 steps away from him with her back turned, leaning down to say something to a server. The paper bag was still on the chair. Then the ground floor exploded. He didn't remember the sound. He remembered only the force. An enormous blow rising from beneath the floor and throwing everything upward. And then the ringing. A long, dense ringing that sealed both ears shut. And inside that ringing there was nothing else. He woke on his side on the floor. The smoke was so thick he couldn't see the ceiling. Every light was out, and the only illumination came from the red flashes outside on the street, sweeping through the smoke in slow pulses. He tried to stand and fell. He crawled. He called his sister's name, and he couldn't hear his own voice. At the far end of the room, where the doorway leading to the stairs had collapsed into a heap, someone was working. Roderick saw the back of a man, not one of his people, not one of the guests. A man in an old canvas work coat, kneeling on one knee, both hands reaching into the wreckage to lift a beam that had fallen across the opening. The red light from the street swept across him just as he strained against the weight. Roderick saw those hands clearly. Large hands, thick fingers, the backs of the hands and the wrists, covered with old splinter scars, scratches crossing older scratches, the kind of marks only decades of working with wood could leave on a man's skin. He wasn't wearing gloves. He managed to pull the beam free, and then he dragged Marguerite out from beneath the wreckage. By the time Roderick crawled close enough, the man had already laid his sister on a clear section of floor and was using the edge of his own coat to brush smoke and dust away from her face. He looked up at Roderick. The two men looked at each other for exactly 1.5 seconds. The man didn't say anything. Then he turned back toward the wreckage, because there were still people crying out somewhere inside, and he stood and went in a second time. Roderick didn't stop him. The thought never even entered his mind. He was holding his sister, and he couldn't think at all. The man in the canvas coat never came back out. Outside, people pulled Roderick to his feet and took him away, and all he remembered was repeating the same sentence over and over, saying that she told me she had something she needed to tell me. At the hospital, they made him sit in the corridor. Calm stood at the end of that hallway for all 40 minutes and never left. Marguerite Vance died at 5 minutes to 9. Exactly 40 minutes after the moment Roderick had watched his sister being pulled from that doorway. 3 years later, in his study on Beacon Hill, Roderick was still sitting in the same place with the victim list in front of him. He had never asked the name of that man, not once in 3 years. He had assumed the man had died simply because he had been in the wrong place on a night meant for Roderick, and he had poured everything left inside him into finding the person who had planted that bomb. And the name he found was Vincent Ardo. He had never looked for the paper bag left on the chair either. He couldn't remember whether it had still been there afterward. And in 3 years, not once had he asked himself what his sister had intended to give him that night. Colum brought the file upstairs at 3:45 on Saturday morning, nearly a full day earlier than the deadline Roderick had given him. He knocked twice before opening the door, and what he found was the desk lamp still burning, the wooden box still resting in the middle of the desk, and the man behind it sitting in exactly the same position Colum had left him in the night before. Colum placed the folder on the edge of the desk. "It's done, sir." Roderick didn't ask a single question. He pulled the papers toward him. The first page was a city record, typed and coldly factual. Thomas Whitmore, 59 years old, occupation listed as carpenter, self-employed, workshop address on Bowden Street in Dorchester, died on the night of September 14th, at the scene. The second page was a copy of the Boston Fire Department report, the section listing civilians present at the scene, and on the fourth line was a brief note, stating that this man had entered and left the collapsed area a second time, before the firefighters had completed their deployment. The third page was his business registration, last renewed in July of that year. The fourth page contained household and family information. Wife, Nora Whitmore, 56 years old. Daughter, Ella Whitmore, 27. Beneath that were several lines in Colm's handwriting. The lease on the workshop was still active, and the person who had been paying the rent for the past 3 years was the daughter. Roderick turned to the next page and stopped. It was a photograph. A picture taken from the business registration records, the kind someone snapped quickly outside a workshop for paperwork. A man stood in front of a roll-up door wearing a canvas work coat, his sleeves pushed to the elbows. He wasn't looking directly into the camera. His eyes were narrowed slightly against the sunlight, and his hands hung loosely at his sides. Roderick lowered the desk lamp. He leaned closer to the photograph. Large hands, thick fingers. From the backs of those hands to the wrists ran overlapping dark marks, faint in the photograph but visible enough, the kind of scars no one could fake, and no other trade would leave on human skin in quite that way. He sat without moving for a very long time. Colum remained where he was, equally still. Then Roderick laid the photograph on the desk, straightened it carefully, and reached for the wooden box. He tilted it beneath the lamp. His fingertip followed the carved line running around the lid, that closed pattern in the grain, the place where it changed direction at the upper right corner, and the craftsman had needed to lift the chisel before setting it down again. Then he continued through the file, searching for the photographs Colum had clipped to the back, pictures taken inside the workshop when the machinery was being listed for liquidation. In one of them, an unfinished wooden tabletop leaned at an angle against the wall, and along its edge ran the exact same pattern. He placed the photograph beside the box and looked at both at once. There was nothing to say, so he said nothing. He simply sat there, one hand resting on the photograph, the other on the lid of the box, while several minutes passed through a room where the only sound was the faint hum of the desk lamp. Then he did something very slowly. He closed the folder, took the victim list from the night of September 14th out of the flat cardboard box, and placed it beside the page containing the family information. Under the letter W, near the bottom of the page, was the name the delivery girl had spoken just 2 nights ago. Now that name lay beside a photograph, beside 2 scarred hands, beside a workshop on Bowden Street, beside a woman named Nora, beside a 27-year-old woman who had stood 2 steps away from him and pushed his money back across the table. Roderick closed his eyes. He sat that way long enough for Calm to begin wondering whether he should pour him a glass of water, then decide against it. When Roderick opened his eyes again, he could finally see the entire chain of things he had never once considered during the past 3 years. That man had a workshop less than 20 minutes by car from the restaurant. That man had been there at 7:20 on a Tuesday evening, in the middle of a private gathering closed to outsiders, and nothing in the records explained why. He wasn't a guest. He wasn't a server. He had been there, and he had been there with his hands bare. Roderick looked once more at the wooden box on his desk, the box a young woman had sold him for exactly the amount she owed, refusing to take even $1 more. He straightened in his chair. Calm. Yes, sir. Go home and get some sleep. The driver looked at him for a moment, then nodded and left. The door closed behind him. For 3 years, Roderick Vance had remembered only one thing about that night, and he had never told anyone that he remembered it. He remembered 2 hands covered in old splinter scars, reaching into the wreckage to pull his sister out. Tonight, he knew the name of the man those hands belonged to, and he was beginning to understand that if Thomas Whitmore had been there, then he had come for a reason, and that reason was buried somewhere inside the 3 years Roderick had left empty. The gift shop sat on a sloping stretch of Beacon Hill, with a narrow glass door and a bell hanging from the frame. Roderick pushed the door open at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. The owner, a woman around 50, was rearranging merchandise on a shelf, and she looked up with the familiar smile of someone greeting a customer, only for that smile to disappear within 2 seconds, when she recognized the man who had just walked in. How much does Miss Whitmore still owe this shop? She blinked. I'm sorry, sir, The number. She opened the ledger beneath the counter with fingers that had suddenly become clumsy, read out an amount, then hurried to add that Ella had actually paid most of it the night before, and that only the remaining difference and the wrapping charge were still outstanding. Roderick placed money on the counter, more than the amount she had just named. Clear all of it, he said, and write in your ledger that the shop covered it, not her. Yes, sir. That consignment agreement you make delivery workers sign, the one that holds them responsible when customers refuse an order. Roderick continued, his voice still even. How many people have you made sign it? The shop owner couldn't answer. Get rid of it, he said, then turned toward the door. The bell above the frame rang once behind him. That afternoon, the car stopped at the entrance to Elm Hill Street in Dorchester, in the same place where Calm had parked the night before. Roderick got out on his own and walked the rest of the way himself. He told Colm to stay in the car. It was a 3-story building with wooden stairs, and when he reached the 3rd-floor landing, he paused for a moment before knocking. Footsteps sounded from inside, followed by the scrape of the chain lock. The door opened about the width of a hand, and Ella looked out. She recognized him immediately, and Roderick watched the color drain from her face. The night before, after her mother had gone to sleep, she had lain on the sofa and typed the name Roderick Vance into her phone. She had read until nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. She had read old articles about the Charlestown docks, read about 2 federal investigations that had gone nowhere, read one story with a photograph taken from a distance, and a caption that described him with 3 words she had to read twice before she believed them. She had lain there for a long time, with the phone resting face down on her chest, thinking that she had stood 2 steps away from that man and pushed his money back across the table. Miss Whitmore, what are you doing here? Her voice was quiet, and she didn't open the door another inch. I want to talk. I sold you the box. You paid for it. It's done. It isn't. I'm not taking anything else from you. I gave the extra money back right there at the table. You remember that, don't you? She was speaking faster now, and one hand had already moved to the edge of the door. If this is about the box, keep it. I'm not asking for it back, and I'm not going to tell anyone anything either. I know. Then what do you want? From somewhere inside the apartment, her mother's voice called out, asking who it was. Ella turned her head and called back. It's nothing, Mom. And when she faced him again, Roderick saw her fingers gripping the edge of the door so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. My mother is sick, she said, and this time there was something different in her voice. It wasn't fear anymore. It was protection. Whatever you want, say it to me right here. Don't come inside. Roderick didn't move forward. He stepped back half a pace and stood fully in the center of the landing, leaving a clear stretch of empty space between them. I'm not coming in. She looked at him, then at the distance he had deliberately placed between them, and she didn't understand what it meant. Last night you told me your father made that box, he said. Yes. And you said he died 3 years ago. Yes. Do you know how he died? Ella went silent. Then she answered in the flat voice of someone who had repeated the same sentence so many times that all the edges had worn away. They told us there was an accident in a building in the North End. My father had gone there to make a delivery. They said it was a gas leak. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Who told you that? The city. The newspapers, too. There were only a few lines about it, she said. That's all I've known for 3 years. Roderick nodded very slowly. His eyes never left her. I was inside that building. Ella didn't move. What? That night was my party, he said. Someone planted a bomb on the ground floor. They planted it because of me. In the dim hallway, she could clearly hear the old heating system humming somewhere below the second floor. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Your father was there, Roderick continued, and his voice didn't rise, didn't slow, and contained no unnecessary word to soften what came next. He pulled my sister out of the collapse. Then he went back in a second time because there were still people calling for help inside. He didn't come back out. Ella's hand slipped away from the edge of the door. I saw him, he said. I looked straight into his face, and I didn't ask his name. For 3 years, I never asked. The door opened a little wider. Not because she pushed it, but because she had stopped holding it in place. Your father died because of me, Roderick said. I came here to tell you that. Ella stepped fully out onto the landing and pulled the door shut behind her so her mother wouldn't hear. She stood there with both arms hanging at her sides, and for the first few seconds, she couldn't say anything at all. Then she spoke, and her voice was very quiet. A gas leak. Roderick didn't answer. 3 years, she said. For 3 years, my mother believed her husband died because of a broken pipe. She kept saying that at least it was quick, at least no one was to blame, because that was the only thing she could use to comfort herself. Do you know how many times she's said that? No. I stopped counting too, she said. Now I have to go back in there and sit down to dinner with my mother. And I have to decide whether I should tell her that for the past 3 years, she's been comforting herself with something that was never true. That's what you just left me with. Roderick stood still. A bomb, she said, and this time her voice broke. Someone planted a bomb. That's what you're telling me. Someone planted it because of you, because of your name, because of what you do, what your family does, whatever it is you and those people on the other side do to each other in this city. And what did my father do? My father made furniture. He built staircases for people, kitchen cabinets, little ring boxes for couples about to get married. He never owed anyone a cent in his entire life. She stepped forward once, and Roderick didn't move back. He went there to make a delivery. I don't know what he was delivering. I don't know why he was inside your building that night. And I don't even need to know anymore. What I know is that he walked into that place empty-handed. He walked straight into the middle of a war between people he didn't even know were at war. And then he went back in a second time. Because that's the kind of man he was. Because he couldn't leave anyone behind. And all of you let him go back in. I didn't stop him, Roderick said. I know you didn't, she said. That's exactly the point. You sat there holding your sister, and you let a stranger go back into that place instead of you. Then for 3 years, you never once asked what his name was. He said nothing. Do you have any idea what those 3 years have been like for my family? Ella said. My mother got sick 8 months after the funeral. I dropped out of my evening classes. I sold the machines in my father's workshop one by one. I sold his last hand plane in February of last year. And last night I sold the final thing we had left. I sold it to you. Do you know what the funniest part is? She laughed. A dry, hollow sound with nothing inside it. That $340 from you was the most relieved I've felt in 3 years. I walked home feeling grateful to you. I thought there were still decent people in the world. Roderick still didn't speak. And now you're standing here telling me that money came from the man who killed my father. I didn't kill your father. They planted that bomb for you, she said. You just said those words yourself. He went silent. He could have told her that he had lost his sister that night. He could have told her that he too had sat in a hospital corridor for 40 minutes. He could have told her that only that morning he had cleared every dollar she owed the gift shop, that he had forced them to get rid of the contract. He didn't say any of it. He stood there and let her finish. Go home, Ella said. Miss Whitmore. Go home, she said again, and she lifted the back of her hand to wipe her face, quickly and angrily. You came here to make yourself feel better, not for me. You've said it now, so maybe you feel lighter, but I'm the one who has to live with what you just told me starting tonight. Go. Roderick looked at her for one more moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and took out a plain white card with no company name, no title, only a phone number. He didn't hand it to her. He bent down and placed it on the doorstep at her feet, doing it very slowly, as if he wanted her to see clearly that he had no intention of touching her. "You don't have to call," he said, "but if there ever comes a day when you want to know who planted that bomb, I'm the only person still looking." Then he turned away. She listened to the sound of his shoes descending all 3 flights of wooden stairs, heard the front door downstairs close, then heard an engine start at the end of the street and fade into the distance. Ella remained on the landing for a long time. The card was still lying on the doorstep. She didn't pick it up. When she went back inside, Nora was sitting at the kitchen table with one hand resting on the dialysis appointment calendar. "Who was it, sweetheart?" Ella walked past her, opened the cupboard, and took down 2 plates. "Someone knocked on the wrong door," she said. Nora watched her daughter's back, and she didn't ask another question. 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning, the cashier at the dialysis center called Ella back, just as she and her mother were getting ready to leave. "Miss Whitmore, your mother's copay for this month has already been covered." Ella stopped. "I haven't paid it yet." "That's right. A patient assistance fund paid it. They also covered the outstanding balance from the previous 2 months. The cashier turned the screen so Ella could see it. "We've had a few other patients receive help from this fund too, so don't worry. Everything is legitimate. I never submitted an application. They told us the center referred a list of patients." On the way home, Nora sat in the front seat and didn't ask anything. That afternoon, when Ella stopped by the workshop on Bowden Street to pick up the last few things, the property manager came out and handed her a sheet of paper. The lease had been extended for another 12 months. The line for the monthly rent was blank, and beneath it was a stamp stating that the rent had been waived. "The new owner arranged it that way," the man said. "I only received the paperwork, Miss Whitmore." "Who is the new owner?" "It doesn't say. Some limited liability company." Ella stood in the middle of her father's empty workshop with the paper in her hand, and she remained there until darkness fell. That night, she picked up the business card. It was still where she had left it 3 weeks earlier, on the ledge of the shoe cabinet beside the door, covered with a thin layer of dust. She called the number at 9 o'clock that evening. The phone rang once and a half. "I need to see you," she said. "Right now." Colum came to pick her up 40 minutes later. Ella told him not to park in front of the building, and he nodded, as though he had already known she would say it. The car stopped outside a low office building near the Charlestown docks, with glass doors and the hallway lights still burning. Roderick stood when she entered the room. He didn't ask her to sit because he already knew she wouldn't. Ella placed the lease extension on the desk between them. Then she put the payment receipt the cashier had printed for her that morning beside it. "You're behind both of these." Roderick looked at the 2 sheets of paper. He didn't deny it. "Do you know how long it took me to find out?" she said. 3 weeks. I called that fund, and they told me they don't disclose the names of donors. I called the state's corporate registry and looked up the company listed as the new owner of the property. It was formed 19 days ago. 19 days, Mr. Vance. Exactly 2 days after the afternoon you stood outside my door. You work fast. Don't compliment me," she said. She pushed both papers toward him. "Take them back. Both of them." "No. Do you not understand what I'm saying?" Her voice rose. "For 3 weeks, I've sat beside my mother 3 times a week in that room, and I haven't been able to say one word to her about how my father really died. Not one word, because I don't know where to begin. And now your money is flowing into that room. Your money is paying for the chair my mother sits in. Do you understand what I'm being forced to swallow?" Roderick remained still on the other side of the desk. "You're buying me off with blood money," she said. "You're paying me to keep my mouth shut, to make me feel indebted to you, so my father's name stays buried where it is, and no one ever digs it up again." There was a silence. Roderick placed both hands on the edge of the desk. "Would you sit down?" "No." "All right," he said. Then he continued, his voice no louder than before. "I'm not buying anything. I'm paying back a debt to a man who isn't alive to collect it." Ella couldn't answer immediately. "Your father gave me 40 minutes, he said. "He pulled my sister out, and because of him I had another 40 minutes with her at the hospital. I held her hand for 40 minutes. You already know what he paid for those minutes. Then go find his grave and pay him there," she said. "Don't pay it into my home." "He has a grave," Roderick said. "His wife is the one on dialysis." Ella turned her face away. She looked through the glass, down toward the lights along the harbor, and it took her a long time before she could speak again. "Do you know what makes me angriest?" she said. "It's that I need it. I need that fund. I need that workshop. I'm standing here this furious with you, and I still can't bring myself to tell you to cut it off, because I don't know where the money will come from next month. You put me in that position, and then you call it paying a debt. If you want me to stop it, I'll stop it," he said. "You only have to say the words." Ella remained silent for a very long time. She didn't say them. Roderick didn't look at her during that silence. He lowered his eyes, opened a desk drawer, and took something out, placing it on the wood between them. The music box. "But this, I can't keep any more," he said. "I paid for it, but I've realized it wasn't really mine to buy." Ella looked at the box. "What does that mean?" "There are 2 initials carved into the bottom," Roderick said. "Your father carved them for whoever commissioned it. I need to know who that was, and I think you're the only person left in the world who can still open it." She didn't answer him that night. 2 days later, she sent a single line saying that she would be at the workshop from 9 o'clock Saturday morning, and if he wanted, he could bring the box. She added one more thing very clearly, that she was doing this because the box had belonged to her father, not because of him. On Saturday morning, the roll-up door on Bowden Street rose. Inside, there was almost nothing left, except a workbench bolted to the floor, a few empty wooden shelves, and a hanging lamp. Ella had spread a piece of canvas across the workbench by the time Roderick arrived. He placed the box in the middle of the cloth and stepped back. She didn't touch it right away. She went to a drawer, took out a pair of thin cloth gloves, put them on, and only then lifted the box, and the way she held it was completely different from the way he had been holding it for the past 3 weeks. She tilted it, turned it slowly beneath the light, and spoke without looking up. "Red cedar. My father saved this kind of wood. He didn't use it casually." She ran one finger along the grain circling the lid. "He carved this part by hand, not with a machine. He lifted the chisel here at the corner, then set it down again." "I noticed that too," Roderick said. Ella glanced at him once, then looked away. She turned the box upside down and angled the bottom toward the light, and for the first time in her life, she saw the 2 initials. She stared at them for a long time. "M.V., she said. 9/14. "Do you know who that is?" "No." She set the box down. "My father took private commissions from regular customers, and he didn't keep formal records. He wrote each job on a piece of paper and pinned it to the wall, then threw it away when the work was finished. That wall over there's nothing left on it now." She removed the music compartment, lifted the mechanism out of the box, and placed it to one side. Then she did something completely natural, without thinking, like a physical habit she had learned when she was a child. She turned the box upside down on the workbench and tapped the bottom with the knuckle of her index finger. 3 knocks. She stopped. Then she tapped 3 more times, shifting slightly to the left, then to the right. Roderick saw her shoulders stiffen. "What is it?" "The echo is wrong," she said. "What does that mean?" Ella didn't answer him. She turned the box upright, judged the depth of the interior with her eyes, then flipped it over again and measured the thickness of the bottom by pressing her thumb against the edge. She repeated the process twice. "It's thicker than it needs to be," she said. She looked up at him, and something in her expression had changed. "Do you know how long my father worked as a carpenter?" "No." "More than 30 years, she said. "And in all those years, he never made a box with only one compartment. Not once. The cabinets he built for people's homes were the same. There was always a place. When I was little, I asked him why he did that, and he told me it was so people would have somewhere to keep the things they couldn't say out loud." She lowered her eyes to the box again. "Everyone has something like that. My father believed that." She began feeling along the edge of the bottom with her gloved fingertips, slowly, inch by inch, around all 4 sides. Roderick didn't ask another question. He stood 2 steps from the workbench and watched her hands move around the block of wood. And for the first time, he thought about the fact that those hands had learned the trade from the other pair of hands he remembered. Ella stopped at the short edge along the back. "Here," she said. "There's a sliding joint." He hid it exactly where the grain changes direction, so the eye would pass right over it. "Can you open it?" "It has to move the right way," she said. "If you push it the wrong way, the harder you press, the tighter it locks. Step away from the light for me." Roderick moved aside. She placed both thumbs along the edge, applied the slightest pressure, and pushed sideways instead of downward. Nothing happened. She changed hands and pushed in the opposite direction. Then she tilted the entire box to a 45-degree angle and tried once more. There was a very soft click, the sound of wood sliding against wood, worn smooth because it had been made by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. A thin panel about the size of a palm slid out from the bottom of the box. Both of them went silent. Ella turned the box upright and set it on the workbench very slowly, then pulled the hanging lamp closer. Inside the shallow compartment were 2 things. One was a small card made of thick paper, its edges yellowed with age. The handwriting was slanted and fine, the writing of someone young. Ella tilted her head to read it, then read it aloud because Roderick was standing too far away to see. "For you, this is a gift I've owed you for a long time. There's something I need to tell you, but I can't say it in a room full of people." She stopped. "There's no name. Whoever wrote it never signed it." Roderick didn't move. Beside the card, pressed against the wall of the compartment, lay a small black USB drive with no label and no name. Ella looked at it, then raised her eyes to the man standing across the workbench, and she saw that his face had gone completely pale beneath the hanging light. For 3 years, Roderick Vance had searched every corner of this city for the person who had planted that bomb. It had never occurred to him that what he needed had been lying inside a wooden box beneath a bed in a third-floor apartment in Dorchester for 3 long years. There was no computer in the workshop. Ella had an old laptop in the canvas bag she carried with her to work, and she was the one who took it out, placed it on the workbench, and plugged in the USB drive. Roderick remained exactly where he was. "Aren't you coming closer?" she asked. "You open it first." She looked at him for a moment, then turned back to the screen. The drive appeared with 2 folders and 1 audio file. Ella opened the first folder. Inside were screenshots and photographs of documents, more than 40 of them, numbered by date. She moved through them one by one, and she didn't understand what she was looking at, but she looked long enough to see a pattern. "These are ledgers," she said. "The same table, 2 versions. This one and this one don't match." She turned the screen toward him. "You look at it. I work in a gift shop. I'm not an accountant." Roderick stepped forward. He leaned over the screen and began to read. And he read very quickly, because those were his own numbers. The records for Port Route 7, the arrival schedule for every shipment, container numbers, unloading times, the names of the transfer carriers. Beside them was a second version, the same dates, the same shipments, but several lines were different, and those differences repeated themselves consistently for 2 straight years. He didn't say a word for 4 minutes. Ella opened the second folder. Inside were photographs of transfer records, payments moving through 3 intermediary companies, each one receiving from the one before it, with the last company registered at an address in Rhode Island. There was also a secretly taken photograph, poor in quality, shot through the window of a restaurant, showing 2 men seated across from each other. One had his back to the camera, the other faced outward, one hand pushing an envelope across the table. Ella leaned closer to study the picture, then looked up. "This man looks familiar. Where have you seen him?" "Outside the building the other night," she said. "He went inside while I was waiting in the car. The man with the gray hair who walks with a limp." Roderick didn't answer. He reached across the keyboard and opened the final audio file. There was a rustling sound, the scrape of a chair, then a woman's voice. Young, clear, slightly hurried. "All right, let me start from the beginning so I can keep this in order." Ella turned sharply toward Roderick. He didn't move, but the hand resting on the edge of the workbench tightened. "I first started noticing it in April of last year," the young woman's voice continued. 6 shipments in a row were intercepted inside the exact same 3-hour window, and I only gave the schedule to 3 people each time, so I changed the way I reported it. I gave each person a different time window, and none of them knew I was doing it. The shipment that got hit was the one that matched the time I gave Uncle Silas. Ella heard herself stop breathing. "I checked the last 2 years. The missing money moved through 3 companies, and the last one is registered in Providence. He isn't selling directly to Ardo. He's selling through other people. So from the outside, every trail points back to Ardo. For 2 years, you've thought they knew our schedule because they had someone inside the port. They don't, Roderick. They're buying it from the man sitting next to you." There was a pause in the recording, long enough to hear her breathe out. "I don't dare tell you at the company. I don't dare tell you at home. And I don't dare send any of this through the mail or the office, because he reads everything that passes through there. You know that. So I'm doing it this way." Her voice changed, becoming a little lighter, almost amused. "I asked a carpenter in Dorchester to make you a box. He built a hidden compartment into it. He told me every box he makes has one. I'll give it to you for your birthday. Once you open your present, you'll have all of this too. I just need you to open it somewhere with only the 2 of us." Then she said one final thing. "Don't do anything yet. Let me finish telling you everything first." The recording ended. There was no sound in the workshop except the faint hum of the hanging lamp. Ella didn't dare look toward him. When she finally did, she saw Roderick still bent over the keyboard, his eyes fixed on the screen that had gone still. And he remained that way for a long time. He didn't smash anything. He didn't raise his voice. His face didn't change. Only the hand resting on the edge of the workbench had gone white at the knuckles. "Your sister," Ella said softly. "M.V. Marguerite Vance," he said. 9/14 was your birthday. "Yeah." Ella looked down at the wooden box lying open on the canvas, the shallow hidden compartment still exposed. And suddenly she understood why her father had been inside that building that night. He had gone there to make a delivery. He had gone there to deliver this exact box. "My father brought it there for her," she said. "Yeah." She gave him the drive and the note days before so he could measure and fit the hidden panel perfectly before final assembly. Then how did it end up back at the workshop? He brought the finished piece to deliver that evening and left it boxed in his truck while he stepped inside to find her, Roderick said. When the police released his truck back to your family, the box was still inside with his tools. Ella sat down on the only stool in the workshop. Roderick straightened. He looked at the photograph taken through the restaurant window, at the gray-haired man pushing an envelope across the table, and when he spoke, his voice was the most frighteningly even voice Ella had ever heard from another human being. For 3 years, I've been taking revenge on the wrong man, he said, and the right one has still been sitting down to dinner with me every week. Ella looked up at him. Then it's over, isn't it? You have everything right here. No, Roderick said. This only proves he was stealing. He closed the laptop. It doesn't prove he killed my sister. The following Monday, Roderick called 4 people into the Charlestown office, each at a different hour, and none of them saw the others. To the first man, he said the shipment scheduled for the 19th would come into Pier 9 in the early evening. To the second, he said Pier 4, before dawn. To the third, he said the ship had been delayed until the following week. Silas Brenner came in last, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and settled into the chair across from Roderick, with the easy familiarity of a man who had been sitting in that same chair for 20 years. What's going on that you called me up here at this hour? The shipment on the 19th, Roderick said. It's changed. Pier 7, 3 o'clock in the morning, not 4 like the old schedule says. I'm cutting the crew down. Only 2 trucks. Why are you cutting the crew? Because I don't want anyone seeing it. Silas nodded thoughtfully. He asked 2 more questions about the paperwork, then a third, very casually, about who would be responsible for unloading. Roderick answered. Silas nodded again and stood. When he reached the door, he turned back. You've seemed different lately. I'm just tired. Are you sleeping? He asked, and his voice was as warm as it had always been. You need to sleep. The girl's gone, but you still have to live. Roderick watched him leave the room. Then he sat without moving for 15 minutes, and thought about the fact that he had just given that man 4 specific pieces of information that no one else in the world had been allowed to hear. He called Coleman. Have someone watch Pier 7 starting the night of the 18th, he said. Don't watch the shipment. Watch to see if anyone comes to look. Yes, sir. And put 2 people at Pier 9 and Pier 4 as well. All 3 places at the same time. Cullum didn't ask why. He asked only one question. If someone shows up, what do we do? Nothing, Roderick said. Take pictures and leave. On Wednesday morning, 7 miles away, Ella was helping her mother out of the dialysis center and looking for their car when someone called her name. A woman stood beside a streetlight, holding a paper cup of coffee, around 40 years old, wearing a gray coat. Miss Whitmore, could I have 2 minutes of your time? Who are you? The woman opened a leather credential wallet and held it at just enough distance for Ella to see, then folded it closed again. Hollis Ward. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation office in Boston. Ella turned toward her mother. Nora looked at the woman, then at her daughter, and said she would sit on the bench over there and wait. She walked slowly and didn't look back. I don't have anything to tell you. You don't know what I'm going to ask yet. I can guess. Hollis Ward took a sip of coffee. 3 weeks ago, you got into a car driven by a man named Colm Deverell. 2 weeks ago, you called a prepaid phone number. This past Saturday, a car sat on Bowden Street for 4 hours. She said all of it calmly, without emphasizing any part. I'm not here to frighten you. I'm here because you're walking into the middle of an open case, and you don't seem to know it. My father died 3 years ago, Ella said. In that building, you've had an open case for 3 years, and no one ever called my mother even once. Hollis Ward was silent for a moment. I know your father's name, she said. Thomas Whitmore. He's on the 4th line of the scene report. Then you know what he did that night. I do. Ella looked down. Miss Whitmore, I'm going to be direct with you, the woman said. The man you've been in contact with is a subject in this investigation. If he has anything connected to the night of September 14th, it needs to be in our hands, not his. Do you understand what could happen if he decides to handle this in his own way? I'm not holding anything. I didn't ask whether you were. Hollis Ward placed a business card on the edge of the nearby bench, instead of handing it directly to her. I'm just leaving you the number. You can call any time, even in the middle of the night. She had taken several steps away when she stopped. One more thing. If no one has called your mother in 3 years, I'm sorry. That should have been different. Ella remained standing there for a long time after the woman disappeared from sight. She thought about the USB drive lying in a drawer at the workshop. She thought about the young woman's voice in the recording, the sentence telling Roderick not to do anything yet. She thought about Roderick Vance's hand, his knuckles gone white against the edge of her father's workbench. Then she picked up the business card and slipped it into the inner compartment of her wallet, deep beneath the other cards. She walked over to the bench. "What did she want, sweetheart?" "Something about insurance, Mom," Ella said, and she helped her mother to her feet. That evening, Roderick sent her a message asking whether she was free on Saturday, because he needed her help with something at the workshop. Ella stared at the message for a long time. Then she replied that she was. She didn't mention the woman in the gray coat at all. The favor he asked turned out to be something very small. There was a long scratch running across the lid of the box, an old mark, probably from the years it had spent beneath the bed, and he wanted it gone. "Hire a carpenter to do it," Ella said. "I want to do it myself." She looked at him for a moment, then opened the workbench drawer and took out a stack of sandpaper and a small rectangular block of wood. She wrapped a sheet of sandpaper around the block, folded the edges over, and handed it to him. "Sand with the grain. Don't go across it." Roderick took it. He placed the box on the canvas and began sanding. After about 10 strokes, Ella spoke. "Stop." "Why?" "You're pressing too hard," she said, "and you're holding it wrong." She stepped closer to the workbench. She didn't touch his hand. Instead, she placed her own hand on the surface beside the wooden block and demonstrated slowly, twice. 4 fingers on top, thumb along the side. The pressure comes down from your shoulder, not from your wrist. Let the weight of your hand do the work. Don't force it. She stepped back. "Try again." He tried again. Lighter. He eased up. "That's better," she said, then walked to the other end of the workshop, sat on the stool, and left him alone. For the next 20 minutes, the man who controlled the Charlestown docks stood bent over a workbench on Bowdoin Street, sanding back and forth over a scratch no longer than the joint of a finger, without saying a word. Ella sat at the other end, glancing over from time to time. He was still doing the corners wrong, she noticed, but she didn't correct him again. A few grains of wood dust clung to the cuff of his shirt, a shirt she guessed cost more than an entire month of her wages, and he didn't brush them away. Close to noon, she stood, walked over to him, leaned down to inspect the surface at an angle beneath the light, and ran one finger over the spot. "It's gone," she said. Roderick set the wooden block down. He looked at the lid longer than a vanished scratch required. "Thank you. I didn't do anything," she said, and she gathered the sandpaper and put it back in the drawer. That was everything they said to each other that morning. On Monday afternoon, Silas Brenner came to the Charlestown office without warning. He sat down, unbuttoned his coat, and left a long silence before speaking, the kind of silence a person uses before saying something personal. "Roderick, yes. I'm telling you this as the man who carried you around when you were 7 years old," he said. "Someone told me you've been going to Dorchester." Roderick didn't answer. "Bowdoin Street," Silas said. "An abandoned woodworking shop. You've been there twice now, and both times you stayed for hours. People see your car, Roderick. You think they don't notice? Say what you came to say." "That delivery girl," he said. He drew out the words, "delivery girl," just slightly. "Not much. Only enough." "I asked around. She delivers orders at night. Works behind a counter at some little gift shop on the hill during the day. Her mother is on dialysis. You know how these things start and how they end." "No," Roderick said. "Tell me." Silas laughed, the indulgent laugh of an uncle. "You're hurting. I understand. For 3 years, you haven't let anyone close. Then suddenly some girl looks at you without fear, and it makes you feel lighter. That's normal. But you're the head of this name. You sit down and eat with that girl once. The whole city knows about it within 2 days. And what people take from that isn't that you're kind, Roderick. What they take from it is that you've gone soft. Are you finished?" "No." Silas leaned forward slightly. "What do you think she's staying around for? She knows who you are now. She knows you can pay her mother's medical bills. Poor kids are sharp, Roderick. They can smell money before they even walk through the door. Cut that money off for 1 month and see whether she's still standing there." Roderick didn't move through any of it. When Silas finished, he remained silent for several more seconds. Then he spoke, his voice even, not raised in the slightest. "That girl pushed my money back across the table." Silas frowned faintly. "What?" "I gave her too much. She pushed the extra back. She took only exactly what she needed," Roderick said. "In 20 years, I haven't met one person in this family who has done that with me. Not one." Silas straightened in his chair. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm learning how to judge people again," Roderick said. "Seems I've been wrong about quite a few of them these past 3 years." The room fell silent. Silas Brenner smiled, a smile that arrived just a little too late, and reached down to fasten his coat again. "You're right," he said. "Everyone misjudges people sometimes." He stood, walked toward the door, and paused there for exactly 1 beat without looking back. Then he left. Roderick remained alone in the room, his eyes fixed on the door that had just closed. The 19th was 4 days away. The night of the 18th, stretching into the early hours of the 19th, there was no rain. Pier 9 was empty. Pier 4 was empty. 2 of Calm's men sat in their cars at those 2 locations for 4 hours and saw nothing except a few seagulls. Pier 7 was different. At 2:40 in the morning, a dark pickup truck moved slowly past the entrance road without using a turn signal, then stopped roughly 100 yards from the gate. The engine remained running. It stayed there for 20 minutes. At exactly 3 o'clock, when Roderick's 2 trucks rolled into the pier, the pickup crept forward another 20 yards. Someone lowered a window. The person didn't get out, didn't take photographs, only watched. At 3:20, the truck drove away. At 7 o'clock that morning, Calm placed 3 photographs and a sheet of paper on Roderick's desk. The license plate was registered in Rhode Island. The vehicle was owned by a rental company. That rental company belonged to a name that appeared on page 11 of the photographs Marguerite had taken 3 years earlier. Pier 7, 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 trucks, Calm said. Exactly what you told him. Roderick looked at the 3 photographs. He arranged them in a straight row across the desk. Only 4 people in the world knew about Pier 7. The other 3 had slept in their own homes that night, and Calm's men had sat outside each house until morning to make certain of it. That's it, Calm said. No, Roderick said. That's only half of it. He called his attorney at 7:30 and spoke with him for 18 minutes. At 8 o'clock, he called someone at the Everett Shipping Company. By 9, he had summoned the 2 men Silas had placed on the port route 5 years earlier, and he reassigned both of them before the morning was over, politely and without explanation. By noon, 3 accounts held under the names of intermediary companies had been frozen at the request of their own lawful owner. Silas Brenner called him at 12:40. Roderick watched the phone vibrate against the desk and didn't answer. Silas called a second time at 1 o'clock. He didn't answer that call either. At 1:15, he told Colum to prepare the car. "Where are we going, sir?" "To see him," Roderick said. "Somewhere public." "What are you going to say to him?" "I'm going to let him do the talking." He stood and picked up his coat. Then he stopped. "Send people to Dorchester," he said, "starting this afternoon. 2 at the entrance to Elm Hill Street, 1 on Bowdoin Street." Colm nodded. "Is something wrong?" "Not yet," Roderick said, "but by tonight he'll know he's finished. And when a man knows he's finished, he starts looking for something he can hold in his hand." Colum stepped outside to make the call. Roderick stood at the window, looking down at the water beyond the docks, thinking about how many things still had to be done before nightfall, and thinking about his sister's voice on the recording, the words telling him not to do anything yet. For 3 years, he had done the exact opposite. For 3 years, he had tightened his hands around the throat of a man in Providence with everything he had, and that man had never planted any bomb. Roderick still didn't know what he was going to do with that truth. The phone on the desk vibrated. He turned, expecting Silas to be calling for the 3rd time. It wasn't him. An unknown number. No name, nothing at all, only a message with a photograph attached. He opened it. The picture had been taken from close range beneath the yellow light of a low-hanging ceiling bulb. A gray concrete floor, cracked, streaked with black machine oil. Lying on that concrete was a strip of blue silk ribbon, the kind used to tie around a gift. One end pulled loose and curled back on itself. Roderick froze in the middle of the room. He knew that ribbon. He had watched it tremble in the hands of a rain-soaked young woman standing beside his dining table 3 weeks earlier, and he remembered that exact shade of blue. He enlarged the photograph. In the upper right corner, blurred and just outside the brightest part of the light, was the leg of a wooden pallet and a section of gray-painted wall. He didn't recognize the place. It wasn't one of his docks. It wasn't any warehouse he owned. The phone vibrated again in his hand. The same number. This time there was no photograph. Only 4 words. "Come alone." The phone vibrated for the 3rd time. This time it was the old number, the number Roderick had been answering for 20 years. He picked up and said nothing. "You didn't answer me twice." Silas Brenner's voice was still warm, still slow. "I had to find another way." "Where are you?" "Do you know how much I hate having to do this?" he said. "I carried you in my arms when you were 7 years old, Roderick. I don't want to be sitting here doing this." "Where are you?" "A warehouse in South Boston, on Dry Dock Street. The 2nd warehouse from the gate," he said. "Bring the wooden box. Bring the USB drive too. Both of them. Roderick, you give me the originals. And don't even think about handing me some other drive, because I know what's on it. You've listened to it. I don't need to. I know what your girl was doing during those last 2 months." There was the sound of a chair scraping across the floor on the other end of the line. "You come alone." No calm. No second car. 9 o'clock tonight. Is she all right? The girl is fine, Silas said. She's sitting in a room. She has a chair. She has water. I'm not that kind of man. You know that. I'm beginning to understand exactly what kind of man you are. There was a silence. 9 o'clock, Silas said, then ended the call. There were 4 people in the room at that moment. Colum stood beside the door. 2 others stood behind the desk, and no one moved. Roderick placed the phone face down on the desk and stared at it for about 5 seconds. When he looked up, his voice was exactly the same as it had been when he asked Silas where he was. Have the car ready for me at 8, he said. You're really going alone, sir? Colum asked. I'm going alone. No one in the room said anything else. But all 4 of them understood, in the way people sometimes understand something without needing it explained, that the man standing in front of them had just made a decision he couldn't take back, and that whatever happened between now and 9 o'clock would make the next 20 years nothing like the last 20. Roderick told the other 3 men to leave. He kept Colum behind. Listen carefully, he said. I need you to do 3 things, and I need you to do them in exactly this order. Colum nodded. First, make 2 copies of the USB drive. You keep one. You take the other to the address I'm writing on this paper and put it directly into the person's hand. No one else's. He wrote several lines on a sheet of paper, folded it, and handed it over. Colum took it without opening it. Second, have people on Drydock Street before 7. They don't go inside. They sit outside and count how many cars, how many people. You send me the numbers and nothing else. Yes, sir. Third, Roderick said, take this. He handed Colum his phone, then opened an application and turned the screen toward him. At 5 minutes to 9, I press this button. From that moment, it starts transmitting. You make sure the connection doesn't break. Colum stared at the screen for a long time. Transmitting where, sir? 2 places, Roderick said. Colum didn't ask anything else. At 7 o'clock that evening, Roderick sat alone in his Charlestown office with the wooden box in front of him. He opened the lid, then closed it again. He thought about the scratch he had sanded away, thought about the 2 hands resting on the workbench as they showed him what to do, 4 fingers on top, thumb against the side. Then he took out a second phone, a white one he had never used before, and called a number he had only seen in files for the past 3 years. It rang 7 times. Who is this? The voice was male, rough, older. Roderick Vance. The other end went completely silent. He heard a television switch off, heard someone tell another person to leave the room, then heard a door close. You're calling me, Vincent Ardo said. You're calling me after 3 years. Yes, for 3 years, you cut off 6 of my shipping routes. You pushed me out of Quincy. My son-in-law had to sell his house. You know all that. I know. Then what the hell are you calling me for? Roderick looked down at the desk. In 20 years, he had never said the words he was about to say to anyone. And when he said them, he didn't wrap them in anything that might soften the blow. I was wrong, he said. I need you to listen to a recording. There was no sound from the other end. Then Vincent Ardo asked slowly, what recording? My sister made it 2 months before she died. Roderick said, I only heard it 10 days ago. For 3 years, I thought you planted that bomb. I didn't. I know that now. There was a very long silence. Then tell me, Ardo said. Roderick told him, briefly, without wasting a single word. The other man didn't interrupt him once. When Roderick finished, Ardo remained silent a little longer. Tonight, he said. 9 o'clock. Drydock Street. What do you want from me? Sit in your car, Roderick said. Don't come inside. You only need to listen. After you've heard it, what you do is up to you. Why me? Because for the past 3 years, you've been the only man I could speak to without choosing my words carefully, Roderick said. And because if I don't walk out of that warehouse, I need someone to know what happened inside. At 5 minutes to 9, Roderick stood outside the gate of the warehouse on Drydock Street, the wooden box tucked beneath his left arm. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pressed once. Then he walked in. Inside was a vast open space with a high ceiling, 2 rows of wooden pallets stacked along the walls, and a low-hanging light exactly like the one in the photograph. 4 men stood scattered around the room. Silas Brenner sat on a folding chair in the middle of the pool of light, one leg crossed over the other, his coat still buttoned. Behind him, about 50 feet away, was the glass door of the warehouse office. The light inside was on. Ella sat on a plastic chair against the wall, both hands resting on her thighs, and her head snapped up the instant the outer door opened. She wasn't hurt. Roderick looked at her for exactly 2 seconds, then turned back. You really did come alone, Silas said. I thought you would. Let her go. The box first. Roderick placed the box on a pallet 4 steps away from him. He didn't move any closer. And the USB drive? It's in the box. Open it. Let me see. Roderick lifted the lid, removed the music mechanism, turned the box upside down, and slid the thin wooden panel out from the bottom. The USB drive lay inside the hidden compartment. Silas looked at the concealed space, and something almost amused passed across his face. That old man knew his work, he said. Who? The carpenter. Silas rested one arm across his knee. Sit down, Roderick. You and I should have one decent conversation before this is over. I'll stand. Fine, he exhaled. I'm only going to ask you one thing. Did you listen to everything on that drive? Yes. Then you know how much I took. 25 million over 5 years. Do you know why? He asked. Because your father died and left you everything, and he left me a chair. I built that port route when you were still too young to read a manifest. Then you came back, 27 years old, and told me to sit down and take minutes. Roderick didn't answer. The girl found out in April, Silas said. She changed the way she gave out the schedules. Different time windows for different people. Do you know how smart she was? Smarter than you. She didn't say a word to anyone either. She just quietly built her little case for 5 straight months. When did you know? August, he said. I saw her digging through old records in the archive. There's only one reason someone starts digging through things like that. Behind him, inside the glass office, Ella had risen to her feet. She stood close to the door. I went to see her, Silas said. Twice. I told her this was something between her uncle and her. Something we could settle ourselves. That she didn't need to hurt her brother any more than he was already hurting. She looked at me like I was some thief she'd caught stealing a wallet in the street. He shrugged. She was going to give it to you on your birthday. I knew that. I needed that night not to happen. Roderick stood perfectly still. Say that again. You heard me. I want to hear you say it. Silas looked up at him. He was 61 years old, and he had waited 3 years to say this to the man sitting in the chair he believed should have been his. I put it on the ground floor, he said. I put it where no one was supposed to be. I set it off at 7:20, because by 7:20, the entire family was upstairs. I wasn't trying to kill anyone, Roderick. I only needed that night to fall apart. I needed everyone to run out into the street and go home. That was all. My sister died. Because of the staircase, Silas said. No one could have predicted that doorway would collapse. She was standing too close to the stairs. Then he let out a weary sigh, and he said the words Roderick would remember for the rest of his life. Besides, the girl probably would have lived if that old carpenter hadn't gone back in a second time. Something sounded inside the glass office. Silas turned his head to look, then turned back again without concern. The old man brought down what was left of that section. He said, That's what I was told. He got her out. Then he crawled back inside. He wasn't a firefighter. What did he know? The rest of the wreckage shifted down. It took them another 10 minutes to dig through it. Those 10 minutes were the girl's 10 minutes. Inside the glass office, Ella pressed both hands against the glass. She didn't cry out. She simply stood there and listened. If the old man had just walked away, Silas said, if he'd only kept walking, Roderick wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking over Silas's shoulder, through the bright glass window, at the face of the young woman standing behind it. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his coat once more and took out a phone. He raised it to chest level. The screen was lit. A call had been running for 9 minutes and 42 seconds, and beneath it were 2 parallel signal lines. Silas Brenner stared at the screen. At first, he didn't understand. Then he did, and his entire body went rigid in the chair. The first line, Roderick said, goes to a car parked outside the gate of this warehouse. Vincent Ardo has been sitting in it since 8:30. He heard everything. Silas couldn't speak. The second line, Roderick said, goes to Special Agent Hollis Ward at the Federal Bureau of Investigation office in Boston. She's been listening since the moment I walked through the gate. The 4 men with Silas looked at one another. Not one of them had signed up to kill the Vance family's daughter, and all of them had just heard him admit out loud that he had done it. The man standing closest to the door lowered his hand first. Then the second man did the same. By the time Colm pushed open the warehouse door and walked in with 3 more men, no one was standing in the way anymore. Colm unlocked the glass office first. Ella stepped out, and she walked straight past Silas Brenner without looking at him even once. She stopped 2 steps from Roderick, and she couldn't find anything to say. Silas was still sitting in the folding chair. He didn't stand. He didn't run. He simply sat there with both hands on his knees, staring down at the concrete floor. Colm walked over to Roderick. He drew what he was carrying from beneath his coat, held it by the grip with the barrel, turned away, and offered it to him. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. There were 11 people inside the warehouse that night. 7 of them either carried the Vance name or had spent 30 years living beneath it. And every one of those 7 knew what was supposed to happen next. It had been done that way since his grandfather's time, Someone took one person from the family. The family took one person back. There was no discussion, no court, no asking anyone's permission. It was the one law that had kept that name standing for 60 years in this city. Roderick took the gun. Ella stepped back half a pace. He held it for a very long time. He looked at the man who had carried him in his arms when he was 7. The man who had stood beside him at his father's funeral. The man who had sat down to dinner with him every week for the 3 years since his sister had been laid in the ground. Then Roderick stepped forward, and he placed the gun on top of a wooden crate beside him. No one in the warehouse breathed. "You took one person from me," Roderick said. "If I kill you, I'll lose another one. And this time, it'll be me." He turned to Colm. "Keep him here. No one touches him." Colm looked at the gun resting on the crate. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he nodded. Hollis Ward entered the warehouse at 9:36 with 4 other people. She read Silas Brenner his rights while he was still sitting in that chair. He didn't say a single word throughout the process, and when they led him past Roderick, he didn't look up. Outside the gate, a car parked across the street started its engine and drove away before anyone could reach it. No one tried to stop it. 3 days later, in a conference room inside the federal building on Courthouse Street, Roderick's attorney placed a copy of the USB drive on the table, along with the complete port route records from the previous 4 years and a list of names. Roderick sat beside him and answered questions for 6 hours. Over the next 3 weeks, he returned 3 more times. What they had him sign was called a proffer agreement, and what it gave him wasn't forgiveness. It meant only that the things he voluntarily disclosed in that room wouldn't be used directly to prosecute him, and nothing more. The price came quickly. In the second month, prosecutors filed civil forfeiture actions against 3 transfer companies, 2 warehouses, and most of what remained at Pier 7. Roderick didn't contest them. His attorney told him he should challenge at least one of them to save face, and Roderick said no. In the 4th month, the heads of 2 other branches of the family stopped taking his calls. At a family memorial gathering, one relative told him in front of everyone that if his father were still alive, the old man wouldn't have survived the shame of seeing this day. Roderick listened to every word, finished his meal, and went home. By the end of the year, only one thing remained beneath the Vance name: the legitimate freight company where his sister had once worked in financial control, with more than 40 employees and a line of tractor trailers running the route from Boston to Albany. That was the only part he kept. Some nights, he sat in his Charlestown office looking out over the water, knowing perfectly well that if he had pulled the trigger in that warehouse, he would still have everything. He also knew that if he had done it, he wouldn't be able to sit where he was sitting now. Vincent Ardo called him only once, in the 3rd month. He didn't talk about reconciliation. He didn't talk about business. He only said that he had heard the entire recording from his car that night, including the part about the carpenter, and that he had a nephew who worked as a roofer. "You know what the most frightening part of your story is?" Ardo said. "For the last 3 years, I've been sitting over here thinking about how to deal with you too, and I was every bit as certain as you were." Then he hung up. Ella didn't attend any of the proceedings. She went to Hollis Ward's office twice, signed her statement about the night at the warehouse, and asked for only one thing. She asked them to make sure the official record stated correctly that Thomas Whitmore had gone back in a second time, because there were still people calling out from inside. Hollis told her that those words had been sitting on the 4th line of the scene report for 3 years. No one had simply ever read them aloud to his family. The test results came back on an afternoon in March. Ella sat in a consultation room at the hospital and listened as the doctor told her that she wasn't compatible with her mother, that Nora's antibody profile wouldn't accept Ella's kidney, and that she could go home, rest, and wait on the national transplant list, like everyone else. Ella sat in silence for a while, then asked one question. She asked whether there was another way. The doctor explained the paired kidney exchange program, how a donor who wasn't compatible with a loved one could still donate to a stranger, and in return, their loved one could be matched with another donor somewhere else in the chain. Ella asked only one more question: how long her mother would have to wait if she did that. Then she signed the papers that same afternoon. Nora found out 2 weeks later, and she argued against it for 4 straight days. She said she was already 56 years old. She said her daughter was only 27. She said she couldn't live with herself if something happened to Ella someday because of this. Ella let her mother say everything she needed to say, then sat down beside the bed and reminded her that her father had taught both of them only one thing that truly mattered, that when there were still people inside, you didn't stand outside. Nora couldn't argue with that. The surgery took place on a Tuesday morning in early May. Ella's kidney went to a man in Pennsylvania whom she would never meet, and a woman in Ohio donated the kidney that was compatible with Nora. 48 hours later, Nora Whitmore opened her eyes in recovery, and the first thing she asked was where her daughter was. They told her Ella was lying 2 floors below her, exactly 2 stories down, and Nora began to cry. In July, Ella went to the workshop on Bowden Street and found the roll-up door open. Inside, Roderick was packing things into cardboard boxes. The lease expired at the end of the month, and he was clearing the place out. He heard her footsteps and turned around, and he didn't ask how she was feeling because he already knew. He simply stood there with a roll of packing tape in his hand. "You're giving the workshop back? I don't have the right to keep it," he said. "It belonged to your father." Ella walked into the middle of the workshop and looked at the workbench bolted to the floor, then at the hanging light. "There's something I want to tell you," she said. "I've been thinking about it for months, and I'm only going to say it once." Roderick set the roll of tape down. "I don't forgive your world," she said. "That world killed my father. It took my mother's husband away from her. It took 3 years away from me, and I will never say that any of that was all right. I don't want you misunderstanding that. I don't. But you walked out of it," she said. "You stood in that warehouse with that thing in your hand, and you put it down. I saw you. I was the only person standing close enough to really see it." She paused. "My father went back in a second time because there were still people inside. He wouldn't want me standing outside the door watching you." Roderick couldn't speak for a long time. Then he asked her only one question, whether she was sure. Ella told him she was, and she added that if he was going to do anything, then he had better do it properly, because she had already used up everything in her trying to survive one more thing done halfway. 1 year later, the roll-up door on Bowden Street rose again on a Saturday morning. Inside were 6 workbenches, a jigsaw, shelves full of lumber, and 14 young people from Dorchester, learning how to hold a sanding block so the pressure came from the shoulder instead of the wrist. No one paid tuition. On the back wall hung a wooden sign made by hand by the first class of students, carved with 2 names, Thomas Whitmore and Marguerite Vance. Ella taught 3 days a week and managed the workshop. Nora kept the books, walked normally again, and still complained to her daughter about not eating enough. On a Thursday evening in late autumn, at the old restaurant in the North End, table number 4 was set for 2, as it was every week. This time, someone was sitting in the chair across from Roderick. He placed a small wooden box on the table. The carved pattern around the lid was still uneven at one corner, and part of the surface wasn't perfectly smooth. Ella picked it up, tilted it beneath the light exactly the way she always did, then turned it upside down and tapped the bottom 3 times with the knuckle of her index finger. She looked up and smiled. "You made a hidden compartment. You taught me. I only taught you how to sand," she said. Then, she placed the box between them and asked in the playful voice of someone teasing him, "Sir, would you please buy this gift box?" Roderick looked at her for a long time. "I already did," he said, "the night you walked into this room. It just took me a while to understand what I had actually bought." This story leaves us with 3 very simple lessons. First, the value of a human being isn't measured by how much money they carry in their pocket. The one man in this story who never looked down on anyone was an unknown carpenter, and it was his calloused hands that changed the fate of an entire powerful family. Second, the true value of a gift isn't found in its price. $340 bought the box, but it took 3 years of pain for anyone to understand what was hidden inside it. And third, revenge has never truly closed a wound. Only truth, and the courage of the person willing to stop first, can do that. If tonight's story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share it so that every day we can continue listening together to more meaningful stories. How did this story make you feel? And in your own life, have you ever met a kind person whose name you never had the chance to ask? Please leave a comment below. We truly want to hear the feelings that come from deep within your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.